My name is Clara. 3 weeks ago, my parents stood up at their 35th anniversary gala in our wealthy Connecticut hometown and announced 50 of our closest friends. We are taking the entire family on a luxury, month-long European cruise to celebrate. The room erupted in applause. My perfect older sister Brittany squealed, clinking her crystal champagne flute with her finance bro husband Chad. I smiled, already tasting the authentic Italian pasta and feeling the Mediterranean sun on my face. It was going to be my first real vacation in almost 6 years. Then, I made the absolute worst mistake of my life. I asked a very simple question. What time is our flight? The entire room fell dead silent. My father looked at me like I had just tracked mud across his pristine white carpets, and my mother's fake smile vanished. Right there, in front of 50 wealthy socialites, my own father stared me down and said, "Clara, you don't need a flight time. You aren't coming. Someone has to stay behind to manage the house renovations and watch Brittany's dogs. It is not like you have a real career anyway." 50 pairs of eyes burned into my skin. 50 witnesses to the exact moment my family publicly declared I was essentially just their unpaid servant. But they had absolutely no idea about the massive secret I had been building in the shadows for the last 4 years. Before I reveal the explosive revenge that tore my toxic family apart, please take a quick second to smash that like button and subscribe. If you have ever been the black sheep of your family, drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from and what time it is right now.
To understand why I brutally walked away from the only life I ever knew, you have to understand the Bingham family. We live in a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in Connecticut. It is the kind of neighborhood where appearances mean everything. My father, Richard, is a ruthless real estate mogul who values profit over people. My mother, Eleanor, is a desperate socialite whose entire existence revolves around country club gossip and maintaining our reputation. Then there is my older sister, Brittany. She is a full-time Instagram mom who has never worked a hard day in her life. Married to Chad, a high-level corporate banker whose name gets aggressively name-dropped into every single conversation. Their brand-new imported sports cars always get the prime parking spots right in front of the massive custom-built house. Meanwhile, my rusty 10-year-old sedan gets parked down the street in the rain. "Clara, move your junk car," my mother would snap whenever I came over to help. "Chad is bringing his clients, and we cannot have that eyesore ruining the driveway." I never fought back. I simply grabbed my keys and moved it. When you are the invisible scapegoat of a wealthy family, you become completely numb to the countless little ways they remind you that your existence simply does not matter. You stop fighting for the better seat at the dinner table. You stay perfectly quiet when your mother introduces your sister by her husband's prestigious job title, while you are just introduced as Clara. She helps out around the house. They think I just do low-level freelance coding. They have absolutely no idea what I really do behind closed doors. 4 years ago, after a devastating breakup left me completely shattered and isolated, I needed an outlet. I bought a cheap microphone and started anonymously investigating corporate fraud and toxic elite scandals in our state. I called the podcast Gilded Lies. I kept my voice heavily disguised and never revealed my true identity. Over those 4 years, my little secret project exploded into a massive phenomenon. I quietly amassed over 2 million dedicated listeners who tuned in every week to hear me expose the exact kind of corrupt, wealthy individuals that my parents regularly invited to our dinner parties. I was a digital phantom,
nobody knew that the internet's most feared investigative journalist was the same pathetic daughter serving hors d'oeuvres at the Bingham family's pretentious Sunday morning brunches.
Let me paint you a vivid picture of what helping out actually means in my toxic household. Every single Thanksgiving, I arrive at 5 in the morning to aggressively scrub the kitchen and prepare a massive feast for 30 people. I arrange the extravagant floral centerpieces, polish the imported antique silver, and perfectly time the cooking of 8 different complicated side dishes. Brittany arrives at 2 in the afternoon wearing designer cashmere, kisses everyone on the cheek, takes 5 selfies for her Instagram, and then sits down, expecting to be served. Christmas is the exact same brutal routine. Plus, I am forced to wrap every single present because my mother claims her wrists hurt too much. Yet somehow, her mysterious wrist pain magically vanishes when she plays tennis at the country club 4 times a week.
The breaking point never comes in one massive explosion. It creeps up on you in tiny, humiliating moments. Like the year Brittany handed me my only birthday gift, a cheap, glittery kitchen apron that literally said, "World's Best Made." She smiled sweetly, like she had done something so incredibly thoughtful. And the saddest part? I actually wore it. I wore it every single time I came over to cook their meals, clean their messes, and babysit her screaming kids so she could go day drinking with her rich friends. The one time I asked to skip a family dinner because I had a massive deadline for my podcast, my mother's voice turned to absolute ice. Family always comes first, Clara. We all make necessary sacrifices. The bitter irony was that I was the only person in that house who ever sacrificed a single thing.
There is only one person in my extended family who actually sees me as a human being. Her name is Aunt Valerie, my father's estranged younger sister. My snobby parents constantly refer to her as the ultimate family disappointment because she refused to marry into money. Instead, she moved to Seattle, opened an indie bookstore, and lived life entirely on her own terms. I have been secretly calling Aunt Valerie every Sunday for years. She is the only person who knows that I am the anonymous host of the Gilded Lies podcast. 2 weeks before the disastrous anniversary gala, Valerie called me with news that made my heart completely stop. A massive media network in Seattle had tracked down her bookstore looking for me. They wanted to offer me a lucrative contract to unmask my true identity and take the podcast mainstream.
That brings us right back to the night of the 35th anniversary gala. After my father publicly humiliated me by uninviting me from the European cruise in front of 50 wealthy guests, my mother actually had the absolute nerve to chime in. Brittany and Chad work so incredibly hard, Clara. They desperately need a real vacation. You will stay here, manage the contractors, and take care of the dogs. It is not like you have anything important going on anyway. I stood there in my plain black dress, clutching a silver tray of dirty champagne flutes, while the entire room watched me get brutally dismissed from my own family. A wealthy neighbor whispered loudly to her husband, "Poor girl, she must be so used to being the help by now." My hands started shaking so violently that I thought I would drop the heavy tray.
I forced a painful smile, nodded politely, and quietly retreated to the dark kitchen to wash their dirty dishes, while they laughed and celebrated without me. But something deep inside my soul finally permanently snapped. Later that night, while cleaning up, I opened my mother's laptop to send a quick email, and what I saw left me completely paralyzed. She had left her email open to a thread with Chad. They weren't just using me as a free maid. They were plotting to forcefully put my name on a fraudulent tax document to cover up Chad's massive corporate embezzlement scheme. If the authorities looked closely, I would be the one going to federal prison, not him. My own family was aggressively setting me up as their perfect legal fall guy. I immediately took out my phone. It was finally time for the ultimate, devastating revenge! I stared at the glowing screen, my blood running completely cold. The phrase, "Clara will take the fall," echoed endlessly in my mind. They honestly believed I was that stupid. For 32 years, I had quietly absorbed their insults, cooked their lavish meals, and played the pathetic role of the dutiful, invisible daughter. This was federal prison. Chad recklessly embezzled millions from his corporate clients, and my own mother was helping him forge my signature on the shell company documents to save his miserable reputation. My shock instantly vanished, replaced by a terrifying, icy rage. I quickly pulled out my encrypted flash drive, the one I used for my secret investigative podcast, and ruthlessly downloaded every single incriminating email, bank transfer, and forged document.
At 2 a.m, I drove back to my depressing, cramped apartment and immediately called Aunt Valerie in Seattle. She answered on the second ring, sensing my sheer panic. I read the horrifying emails out loud, my voice finally breaking when I read my mother's brutal words, calling me perfectly disposable. Valerie was dead silent for a moment. Then her tone shifted into absolute fierce protectiveness. "Clara, pack your bags right now. Do not wait for the morning. You are coming to Seattle, and we are going to aggressively burn their entire fraudulent empire straight to the absolute ground." She was right. I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love of people who actively wanted to destroy me. It was finally time to stop crying and start fighting back. I pulled out my heavy suitcases. By dawn, my entire life was neatly packed into 3 suitcases. I left everything else behind: the cheap furniture, the pathetic world's best maid apron, and the agonizing guilt of never being good enough for the Bingham family. I taped my apartment key to the kitchen counter and walked out the door without a single backwards glance. I aggressively loaded up my rusty 10-year-old sedan, making absolutely sure my encrypted hard drives were safely hidden underneath the passenger seat. As the sun began to rise over the wealthy Connecticut suburbs, illuminating the massive mansions of the corrupt elite I was about to meticulously destroy, I put the car in drive and hit the gas. For the very first time in my miserable existence, I was choosing my own survival over their ridiculous, toxic expectations. The drive from Connecticut to Seattle takes roughly 43 hours if you completely push yourself to the absolute limit. I took 5 long, therapeutic days. I drove through endless golden cornfields, massive, majestic mountains, and tiny rural towns where absolutely nobody knew the Bingham family name. With every single mile marker that passed, the suffocating anxiety that had choked me for my entire life began to slowly evaporate. I stopped at a lonely diner somewhere deep in Montana, ordered a cheap black coffee, and just stared out the window at the breathtaking sunset. I finally felt like a real human being, not just a disposable prop in my parents' twisted socialite theater. I pulled out my laptop right there in the diner booth and began actively drafting the explosive script for my next podcast. On the 5th rainy evening, I finally pulled up to Aunt Valerie's charming independent bookstore in the bustling heart of downtown Seattle. She was waiting right on the porch, her warm eyes crinkling as she rushed forward to pull me into a massive, genuine hug. "Welcome to your real home, Clara," she whispered softly. The intense contrast was absolutely staggering. My parents lived in a cold, sterile 50-room mansion that always felt like an empty museum. Valerie lived in a cozy, cluttered apartment directly above her colorful shop, overflowing with fascinating books, warm blankets, and actual unconditional love. I finally broke down and ugly cried right there on the wet sidewalk,
but they were tears of pure, absolute relief. The helpless, invisible Connecticut maid was officially dead and gone forever. The very next morning, wearing a sharp new blazer Valerie bought me, I confidently marched into the sleek, towering glass headquarters of Vanguard Audio Network. 3 highly intimidating media executives sat across a massive conference table, completely shocked when the legendary anonymous host of the viral Gilded Lies podcast turned out to be a soft-spoken 32-year-old woman. I did not waste any time with pleasantries. I slammed my encrypted flash drive down onto the expensive glass table and forcefully looked them dead in the eyes. I am ready to officially unmask my identity to my 2 million listeners, I announced clearly. But I have one massive, non-negotiable condition. My debut mainstream season is going to be a devastating, multi-part federal takedown of my own corrupt billionaire family. I quickly plugged the drive-in and projected Chad's horrific financial crimes, my mother's incriminating emails, and the forged shell company documents onto the massive boardroom screen. The lead executive's jaw literally dropped to the floor. This was not just a juicy family drama. This was a massive, multi-million-dollar federal crime involving some of the wealthiest elites on the entire East Coast. We will give you a full production team, a massive marketing budget, and top-tier legal protection, the executive promised, his eyes shining with pure greed. This is going to be the absolute biggest true crime podcast event of the entire decade. I viciously smiled, feeling the raw, intoxicating power surging through my veins. The ultimate trap was officially set. Now, I just had to reel them all in. While my toxic family was busy selfishly sipping expensive champagne on a luxury yacht somewhere off the breathtaking coast of Italy, I was viciously grinding in a state-of-the-art Seattle recording studio. For 4 grueling weeks, I worked absolutely non-stop alongside top investigative journalists and vicious corporate lawyers. We meticulously verified every single bank transfer, traced every single stolen dollar, and legally bulletproofed my explosive script. I poured 32 years of pure, unfiltered agony, neglect, and betrayal straight into the studio microphone. I was no longer the pathetic scapegoat who quietly moved her car to the street. I was a highly weaponized journalist armed with undeniable federal evidence, and I was actively preparing to completely obliterate their pristine public image.
Meanwhile, my family's fabulous European vacation was rapidly turning into an absolute living nightmare. Without me there to manage the chaotic household, coordinate their complicated schedules, and act as their unpaid nanny, their entire pathetic facade violently crumbled. My mother frantically texted me 50 times, demanding to know the alarm codes. Brittany left me dozens of unhinged voicemails, sobbing hysterically because her spoiled kids were throwing massive tantrums in Paris, and she had absolutely no idea how to actually parent them. "Clara, you are completely ruining our trip. Pick up the phone," she violently screamed in one recording. I just sat in my plush Seattle studio, sipped my hot coffee, and deliberately forwarded every single one of her pathetic, entitled voicemails straight to the trash. The countdown had officially begun. My family was scheduled to fly back to their precious Connecticut mansion in exactly 3 days, completely oblivious to the massive federal firestorm that was about to violently incinerate their luxurious lives. The promotional trailer for the brand new season of Gilded Lies was scheduled to drop on the exact same morning their plane landed. If you are loving this satisfying revenge story, please make sure to aggressively smash that like button and subscribe right now so you do not miss the explosive confrontation.
Have you ever had to permanently cut off a deeply toxic family member to protect your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below. Stick around because the brutal reality check my billionaire family receives at the airport is absolutely legendary. The morning my toxic family's luxury flight finally touched down at JFK International Airport, the highly anticipated trailer for Season 2 of Gilded Lies officially dropped across every major platform. The episode was aggressively titled, The Billionaire Scapegoat, How the Bingham Family Hid Their Stolen Empire. Within exactly 3 hours, the explosive trailer had racked up over 5 million streams. I sat in the sleek Vanguard control room watching the massive engagement numbers violently skyrocket. The trailer featured a heavily distorted audio clip of my own mother, actively conspiring with Chad to forge my signature on the illegal shell company documents. The internet absolutely exploded. Social media sleuths immediately began connecting the dots, ruthlessly tagging the Bingham family's pristine business accounts.
While I was celebrating in Seattle, my entitled family was stepping right into a massive media ambush. As Richard, Eleanor, Brittany, and Chad strutted toward the private baggage claim, expecting their usual VIP treatment, they were violently swarmed by dozens of ruthless reporters, screaming questions about federal embezzlement and wire fraud. My mother desperately tried to hide her face behind her overpriced designer handbag, while Chad aggressively shoved a cameraman and threatened massive lawsuits. The horrifying footage went instantly viral on TikTok and Twitter. My father's phone immediately started blowing up with panicked calls from his furious real estate investors demanding immediate answers. Their picture-perfect Connecticut facade was publicly burning to the ground in glorious high-definition 4K resolution. My burner phone, the only number they still had for me, completely lost its mind. Hundreds of frantic, unhinged text messages started aggressively pouring in. "Clara, where are you? The police are at Chad's office. Call me right now," my mother hysterically demanded. "You selfish brat, fix this immediately," my father threatened. They still honestly believed I was just their dumb, obedient maid who would miraculously take the blame and magically make the scary federal agents go away. They had absolutely no idea that I was the exact person holding the match that started the fire. I simply took a screenshot of their pathetic, panicking messages and immediately forwarded them to their elite legal team. The trap was closing tighter around their necks, and there was absolutely nothing their expensive lawyers could do to stop it.
Aunt Valerie poured me a massive glass of celebratory red wine as we watched the catastrophic news coverage on her small television. Federal agents had officially raided Chad's prestigious corporate banking firm in downtown Manhattan, actively seizing countless computers and massive boxes of physical evidence. Brittany was caught on live television having an absolute screaming meltdown on her manicured front lawn as investigators towed away her brand-new imported sports cars. They truly thought you would just quietly take the fall for their disgusting crimes, Valerie said, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. They severely underestimated exactly who they were messing with. I smiled, taking a slow, satisfying sip of my wine. The invisible scapegoat had finally become the absolute architect of their brutal destruction.
I was right back in the state-of-the-art recording booth the very next morning to urgently drop episode 2. This episode meticulously detailed exactly how the corrupt Bingham family expertly utilized their prestigious charity galas and high society country club events to ruthlessly launder Chad's stolen millions. I named specific wealthy accomplices and aggressively exposed the fake offshore accounts they desperately tried to pin on my innocent name. The podcast was now charting at #1 globally. Millions of outraged listeners were actively demanding immediate federal charges. Before I tell you about the explosive face-to-face confrontation that literally shattered my family forever, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you love seeing corrupt elites get their instant karma, leave a fire emoji in the comments.
The massive financial fallout was absolutely catastrophic for my father's precious empire. Within exactly 48 hours of episode 2 dropping, Richard Bingham's massive real estate firm completely collapsed. Major investors violently pulled their funding, entirely terrified of being legally associated with a massive federal fraud investigation. My father's prestigious country club instantly revoked their exclusive membership, publicly banishing them from elite Connecticut society. Eleanor was officially a total social outcast, entirely unable to even show her face at the local luxury grocery store without being aggressively harassed by angry podcast fans. The Bingham family name, which they had spent their entire pathetic lives ruthlessly building, was now absolutely synonymous with disgusting corporate greed and criminal fraud. On the 4th day of their total societal destruction, I received a highly unexpected encrypted voice message. It was Brittany, but she wasn't screaming or demanding me to fix her ruined life. She was sobbing uncontrollably, completely broken. Laura, Chad's accounts are completely frozen. The feds are officially indicting him tomorrow morning. I have absolutely nothing left. He completely lied to me about the money. Please, I know you are the podcast host. I recognize your voice. Please, you have to help me. It was the very first time in my entire 32 years of existence that my perfect, spoiled older sister had ever begged me for anything. She was utterly terrified, facing total financial ruin and the horrifying prospect of raising her 2 screaming toddlers entirely alone while her husband rotted in federal prison. I stood silently by the rainy window in Seattle, listening to my sister's pathetic, desperate pleas. A small, weak part of me, the old, traumatized Clara who was deeply conditioned to always fix their massive mistakes, felt a tiny twinge of guilt. But then I fiercely remembered the sheer cruelty of the anniversary gala. I clearly remembered the forged shell company documents meant to send me to a brutal federal prison in her husband's place. Brittany never once cared if I was completely destroyed, as long as she could keep her imported cars and designer clothes. I did not owe her a single shred of loyalty or mercy. I coldly pressed the delete button on my phone, permanently erasing her pathetic voicemail. I was officially done being their personal emotional punching bag. My devastating silence was my final, brutal answer to her. The very next morning, the explosive news broke globally across every major television network. Armed federal agents officially arrested Chad at his massive Connecticut estate. High-definition news helicopters captured the incredibly satisfying moment he was violently shoved into the back of a dark government vehicle, wearing tight silver handcuffs. The prestigious corporate banking firm immediately fired him and publicly, completely disavowed all his illegal actions. Richard and Eleanor were actively brought in for intense federal questioning regarding their deep involvement in the massive financial cover-up. The billion-dollar Bingham family had officially been entirely decimated by the exact same invisible daughter they had so cruelly discarded. Their massive, fraudulent empire was finally burning down to absolute ash.
That same afternoon, the thrilled Vanguard media executives officially presented me with a massive, multi-million-dollar syndication contract. Gilded Lies was no longer just a secret passion project. It was a global phenomenon, and I was officially the face of the massive movement against corrupt elites. I legally signed the incredibly lucrative contract with a steady, confident hand. For 32 long years, my parents had convinced me I was a completely worthless, untalented maid who would never amount to anything. Now, I was a wealthy, highly respected investigative journalist who had single-handedly taken down one of the most corrupt corporate families on the East Coast. But the massive story wasn't quite over yet. The ultimate face-to-face courtroom confrontation was rapidly approaching, and it would change absolutely everything.
6 excruciating months later, the highly publicized federal trial of the Bingham family officially began in downtown Manhattan. It was the absolute biggest corporate fraud case of the entire decade, heavily fueled by the explosive popularity of my hit podcast. I was legally subpoenaed by the prosecution to be their ultimate star witness. As I confidently pulled up to the Grand Courthouse in a sleek black town car, hundreds of aggressive paparazzi cameras violently flashed. True crime fans were actually lined up down the street, holding supportive signs with my podcast logo. The media circus was absolutely deafening. I took a deep, steadying breath and stepped out into the chaotic flashing lights. I was no longer the invisible maid. I was the exact weapon that was going to permanently end their empire. Walking through those heavy oak courtroom doors was the most terrifying and incredibly empowering moment of my entire life. I immediately locked eyes with my toxic family sitting at the defense table. The physical transformation was absolutely staggering. My arrogant father had easily aged 10 years, his signature custom suit hanging loosely off his defeated frame. My snobby mother, Eleanor, who used to violently obsess over her country club status, was wearing a cheap, wrinkled blouse, looking completely hollowed out. Brittany sat rigidly behind them, viciously glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. They completely expected me to instantly wither under their intimidating stares, just like I always did. Instead, I stood incredibly tall, gave them a cold, empty smile, and confidently walked right past them.
When the federal prosecutor officially called me to the wooden witness stand, the entire packed courtroom fell absolutely dead silent. I raised my right hand, officially swore to tell the whole truth, and methodically began dismantling their entire fraudulent existence. Under oath, I forensically detailed exactly how Chad ruthlessly embezzled the corporate funds. Then, the prosecutor played the raw, highly unedited audio of my mother and Chad actively plotting to forge my signature on the illegal shell company documents. The loud audio echoed off the high courtroom walls. "Clara will just take the fall. She is perfectly disposable," my mother's cruel voice loudly declared to the horrified jury. Several jurors visibly gasped in utter disgust. I stared directly at Chad. He was violently sweating and physically shaking. The arrogant defense attorney aggressively tried to entirely assassinate my character during his vicious cross-examination. He desperately tried to paint me as a bitter, insanely jealous younger sister who maliciously fabricated the digital evidence just to destroy her wealthy, successful family. "You were just angry you didn't get to go on their luxury European vacation, weren't you?" he condescendingly sneered. I leaned directly into the microphone, my voice completely steady and terrifyingly calm. I wasn't angry about the vacation. I was angry my own mother was actively trying to send me to a maximum security federal prison to protect a pathetic corporate thief. I legally submitted the verifiable IP addresses proving they forged my signature from their own mansion. The defense attorney was completely speechless.
During a brief, tense afternoon recess, my mother desperately managed to corner me in the cold marble hallway outside the restrooms. She aggressively grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my sharp blazer. "Clara, please, you have to retract your testimony," she hysterically sobbed, her fake tears completely ruining her expensive makeup. "We are your family. You are completely destroying us." I slowly looked down at her shaking hand, then back up into her completely terrified, pathetic eyes.
Exactly 3 weeks later, the exhausted jury returned with their highly anticipated verdict. The judge loudly banged his heavy wooden gavel. Chad was officially found guilty on 32 federal counts of corporate embezzlement and wire fraud, instantly sentenced to 15 brutal years in federal prison. My father, Richard, received 5 years for criminal conspiracy and massive tax evasion. The federal government officially seized their multi-million-dollar Connecticut mansion, Britney's imported sports cars, and every frozen bank account. The mighty Bingham Empire was completely dead and buried. Before I reveal the incredibly satisfying aftermath of my new life, let me ask you, did my toxic family deserve this brutal punishment? Let me know in the comments, and please remember to smash that like button and subscribe right now! When I finally walked out of that grand New York courthouse for the very last time, the bright afternoon sunlight felt incredibly different on my skin. For 32 agonizing years, I had walked around carrying a massive, invisible weight of crushing guilt and toxic familial obligation. I was always desperately waiting for their impossible validation, quietly begging for a tiny scrap of genuine love that simply did not exist. But as I stood there on those massive concrete steps, breathing in the crisp city air, that heavy weight was completely gone. I was officially free. I did not have to brutally shrink myself to make them feel superior anymore. I did not have to wash their dirty dishes, endure their cruel insults, or ever apologize for simply existing. The pathetic, invisible maid was permanently erased from the timeline. Today, my beautiful new life in Seattle looks absolutely nothing like the miserable nightmare I aggressively escaped. Gilded Lies is officially the #1 true crime podcast in the entire country. We just successfully completely wrapped up our massive sold-out national tour, where I stood on brightly lit stages and fiercely empowered thousands of incredible survivors to ruthlessly cut off their own toxic, abusive families. I live in a gorgeous, sunlit penthouse apartment overlooking the breathtaking Puget Sound, entirely paid for by my massive syndication contract. Aunt Valerie comes over every single Sunday for a lavish, stress-free brunch, and we absolutely never discuss the miserable criminals currently rotting away in a cold federal prison cell. I finally have the incredibly peaceful, wealthy life I always truly deserved. From a deep psychological perspective, my horrifying story perfectly illustrates the extreme dangers of the toxic family scapegoat dynamic. Whenever a deeply dysfunctional family desperately needs a convenient punching bag to actively hide their own disgusting flaws, they ruthlessly target the most empathetic child. But here is the brutal secret those corrupt families simply do not realize until it is way too late. The designated scapegoat is actually the absolute strongest person in the entire bloodline. They maliciously pushed me into the dark shadows, hoping I would quietly disappear. But all they actually did was give me the perfect tactical cover to meticulously build my entire multi-million-dollar media empire. They handed me the exact devastating weapons I successfully used to permanently destroy their pathetic fake legacy. If you are currently trapped in a deeply toxic family situation right now, please fiercely listen to my words. Setting aggressive boundaries is not a betrayal. It is your ultimate survival. You do not owe your absolute sanity to people who actively treat you like disposable garbage. Sometimes the most incredibly brave thing you can possibly do is completely walk away and ruthlessly build an incredibly successful empire right on top of their ashes. Thank you all so incredibly much for listening to my insane revenge story today.
If this wild journey resonated with you, please aggressively smash that subscribe button, leave a massive like, and share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear it. Stay incredibly strong, radically protect your inner peace, and I will see you guys next week with another explosive episode.